At the gym today, I felt like an animal, and I'm doing 250 pounds on the incline hammer, sets of 6, and just knocking it out. I am an NCAA champion athlete and a high school state champion wrestler, and for some of you guys out there, you've heard that a lot, but the new guys haven't. I'm gonna tell you about how to build strength, mainly for beginners to intermediate guys, strength in the short term, strength in the long term, and how to recover properly. So what you're looking at here while I'm talking is my workout at the gym, but I'm not showing you every set, just like 4 or 5, and if you can see, I'm actually lifting a lot of weight today. So I've been doing volume training really in the last year or so. And so just in the last couple weeks, I started to feel like my strength has really dipped over time. And so I wanted to make sure I put enough resistance on the muscle again. So I started to focus a little bit on progressive overload and keeping the weight high. And lo and behold, my strength came back. And so I'm inclining 250, like whatever that means, on the hammer machine. And about 2 or 3 years ago, I was actually inclining 270. And I think I might even went above that a little bit. So now quickly to put this into perspective, any machine you use at the gym is hard to measure against other lifts, like free weight barbell incline press, for example. They're not comparable for a lot of different reasons. So you can only really compare the machine to itself. But for what it's worth, on this particular incline machine, 270 is 6 plates. That's 3 plates on each arm. And yeah, I was doing that a couple years ago. So I know a little bit about strength. I actually have a friend in the gym that said, "Andy, you are pound for pound the strongest guy in the gym." And you know, that was very nice to hear. I am pretty strong. That was one of the key advantages I had when I was wrestling, is that I felt like I could overpower anyone my weight. And I did a pretty good job of it. So how do you get strong? Well, I'm gonna help you out here. So let's get started with the long-term way to get strong. And there's basically 2 elements to this. One is consistency. You gotta go to the gym a couple days a week. And the second is progressive overload. That just means lifting heavier weight than you did in the previous session for that muscle group. So let's just take something like bench press, for example. Now, if you're just starting out, or if you've been lifting for a few years, but you've never had any official training or a trainer, this stuff might be handy for you. But let's take the example of someone who's never lifted before. You have a lot of potential because everyone has the capacity to build a lot of muscle and to build a lot of strength. So you might go into the gym, and if I was your coach, I would say, today we're just doing the bar. So you lay down on the bench press and there's a 45-pound bar, and you'll also want a spotter. The first time you work on a muscle group, you want to start light. And I talk about that a lot in my other videos. Now, it doesn't mean that you're weak or that you can't lift it eventually. Everyone starts light on a muscle group that you have never used before, or if you haven't used it in a long time. So for instance, in my first exercise of this video, I did incline bench press on the machine at about 260 or 250. I would never come in and attempt 250 if I had missed a couple weeks of lifting. That is a recipe for an injury. You need to be primed and lifting very close to your peak in order to attempt a heavy set of weight. And heavy is relative. It depends on where you're at. So back to the beginner on the bench press. The first session, just do the bar. Now you might sit down at the bench and rattle off like 30 reps on the bench with just the bar. That's too light. You can go up a little more. But don't beat yourself up if you only do the bar. Because what will happen over time with consistency and progressive overload, you will quickly begin to grow, and you'll be able to add 5 or 10 pounds on each side with the safety clamps, and another 5 pounds, and another 5 until you have the bar and 25-pound plates. Now this process is gonna take you, probably about 3 weeks. 3 weeks is the time frame where I've noticed that muscle goes from feeling like jelly to all of a sudden becoming infused with strength. And then it starts to ramp up for as long as you put attention on it. But the first 3 weeks is really discouraging to get through. I'll give you an example from me. I just started doing neck bridging. This is from wrestling. It's where you lay on your back and you use your neck to prop your body up off the ground. Use your head, because I want to strengthen my neck muscles. And this has taken about 3 or 4 weeks of doing these exercises twice a week for me to get my neck strong again. I haven't used these muscles in 20 years. But it took till the 3rd week before I actually felt like, wow, I can feel muscle in my neck now. But for the first 2 weeks, it was just like pathetic. So it's really important for everybody out there, for a new muscle group, to start light, be consistent with training, and then progressive overload. All right. So there's been a lot of studies that have shown that for beginners, like for instance, if you can't even lift the bar, beginners will have the highest amount of gains with just a little bit of training. So if you can't lift the bar, you will be able to lift much, much more weight than someone who already can lift, say, 135 pounds, multiple reps. And then you want to make sure you repeat training on that muscle group once, probably either every other day or once every 5 days. In my experience, I feel like if you wait a full week, the potential gains that you could make start to taper off. That's why I think 5 days is the maximum you can go before you start to get weak again. And the sweet spot is probably once every other day or once every third day. Another really important thing to keep in mind too is your form while you're lifting. So take bench press, for example. Without having a trainer or a friend who's knowledgeable, what I think is a great resource is YouTube. Spend a lot of time looking at proper technique from the guys out there, and make sure when you start out with great form and technique, so that when you start to increase the weight, your muscle memory has a good foundation. And so this is important for things like bench press, which are pretty simple mechanical movements, but it's even more important for compound movements that are complicated, like your squats or deadlift, clean and jerk, which I hardly hear anyone ever talking about, but which we did back in college football. So those often take a friend or a coach to be able to spot you and to make sure you're doing it right while the weight is low. So be very cautious if you start to ramp up the weights on those compound lifts. But for something like bench press or say hip sled, you should be able to troubleshoot that on your own, and you can pretty much feel the proper range of motion so that you stay safe. I do think it's also important too to try to attempt some of these free weight lifts versus just sticking to the machines. Now, I'm a big advocate of the machines because they're so much safer. And whether you lift till failure or if you have an emergency where you need to set the weight down, the machines allow you to set stuff down safely. Now, the free weights, take for instance squats. If you're lifting to failure, or if you have an emergency while you're lifting, which I've had before, and you need to immediately set the weight down, it can be dangerous if you're not in the squat rack with the safety braces underneath you to catch you. And once again, it's important to know it's not a function of your pride or your ego to use the safety equipment. I'll tell you a story about when I was injured weightlifting. I was probably about 23 years old. I was doing hip sled. So hip sled is like doing squats, but it's a machine. You get in it on your back and you push your feet against the lever, and then you have weights on it. So I was feeling very strong, and I put on who knows how much weight. And while I was pushing up, I had a muscle injury. And can you guess where it was? It was on my neck. Because as you lie down on your back, in this case, this one was designed like that, the machine pushes on other parts of your body. So I had a muscle tear in my neck here, or my trap, and I had to set the weight down immediately. So as you can see, there are unforeseen reasons why you might need to set the weight down. It's not because you're not strong enough to lift it, it's because you might have an injury somewhere else. And that one incident is probably one of like 3 incidents I've had in all of those years. So weightlifting in general is very safe, especially if you are aware of safety and aware of what to do. So I recommend the machines, but it is good for your body to do a compound free weight exercise. And one of the best ones is squats. So if you're just starting out, highly recommend doing some zero resistance squats just to get the form correct. And if you haven't used your legs very much, that is probably going to be enough resistance just to get sore without any weights. Then if you can build up to doing just the bar, which is 45 pounds, with the proper technique and form, then you can slowly build your way up. But I would be very cautious to get too heavy unless you have a friend who's knowledgeable or a coach. Just inspect your form to make sure you're doing it correctly so that it becomes safe when you add more weights. But like I said, squats are a pretty dangerous lift, so use the safety equipment. Cool, so now with consistent training in the gym and progressively adding more and more weight every time, let me explain that a little bit while we're at it. So day 1, say you do just the bar, and after 3 or 6 sets of 10, you're tired and that was a great workout. You go home, the next day you're sore, great. Then the next day you're not sore anymore. That means you're ready to go again. So now you go back to the gym and you do the bar plus some more additional weight. Let's call it 10 pounds on each side. You do 3 or 6 sets of 10, then the next day you're sore, right? And you recover. And so the next day you go in, you progressively load the bar with more weight. So that would be the bar the 10s, and then an additional set of 10s. That's progressive overload. Cool, so you'll be getting stronger in no time. Now the other element that's needed is rest and nutrition. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on it today, and I talked about rest a little bit, right? So between each exercise, you're gonna need a couple days of rest, or maybe just one. Depends how old you are. Young guys can almost go day after day, but if you're just getting started, you'll probably need a couple days of rest. Additionally, you've gotta have just the bare minimum of macronutrients. What's a macro? Carbs, proteins, and fats. That's it. That makes up your macronutrients. You're gonna need to eat your weight in protein every day, but you actually don't have to build strength. You really just need, I don't know, about 60 grams of protein as a bare minimum. And your body is really efficient, and it'll figure out how to utilize that to maximize your strength. But if you wanna get there faster, make sure you eat your weight in pounds in grams of protein per day. If you wanna know how to do that, watch some of my other videos. I talk about it all the time. The other key thing is sleep. You gotta get good sleep. So if you're lucky enough to have a schedule where you can go to sleep when you want and wake up when your body's ready, that's enough. For everybody, that's a different amount of time. But if you find yourself staying up really late and then waking up with an alarm and feeling really groggy and horrible, you're probably not getting enough sleep. So that's really gonna come at a cost. So find a way, get your sleep. If you do those things in time, your strength is gonna explode. And your muscles are gonna explode too, in a good way. And you're gonna get a lot of respect. People are gonna love it. Men are gonna respect your strength, and women are gonna respect your size. So let's say you've been lifting for a while. How do you peak your strength in the short term? Well, as I opened this video up, I switched from rice to beans, and I exploded in strength. And there is a little truth to that. If your diet has a little bit of a shock change, it can often result in big gains of strength. But let's put a pin in that for now. How do you get great strength performance on any given day? Well, let's work backwards. Let's say you wanna hit a personal best on Friday. What you eat the night before is really important. And you wanna make sure, well, you have adequate nutrients, but you also wanna make sure you have the minimum amount of carbohydrates. So for instance, today in my workout, I went from having 300 grams of carbs a day to 400 the night before. And that boost made my body feel like I was explosive. So you wanna make sure you have the carbs, but other macros as well. Also, you wanna make sure you've trained that muscle group pretty heavily, only about 3 to 5 days prior. So in other words, some of your best strength days happen after prolonged training periods. It might seem obvious, it would help to rest for a week or something, but it actually doesn't help. Your strength potential will start to decline after about 5 days. And I've known this because I've done this for 40 years. Almost 40. I started wrestling, I think when I was about 7 or 8 years old. So not quite 40. But the first indication I had of this that was really cool is my uncle was my high school wrestling coach. And I remember before our championship finals, we actually had a normal practice just 2 days before. And then the night before, we still had a solid practice, but we just didn't push it hard into fatigue. And I remember thinking like, oh, shouldn't we rest more? But it only took me 20 more years to realize that he was right. Now, I don't know what the collegiate wrestling coaches and the training staff recommends to the athletes now or anyone on an Olympic level. Maybe I'll get Aaron Donald on the podcast. But that's my experience with peaking on your strength. And the other thing too is a high degree of focus while you're lifting the weight. And if you look at my video here too, I think you can tell that I am highly focused on the lifts before each one, because volume training is kind of routine. You're doing so many sets, so many reps, and not each rep is very hard. So it's easy to just treat it as routine and do another and do another. But with strength training, there's a degree of safety involved, and there's also a degree of power that you can channel by focusing your mind on the action. Your mind on the action. You don't really focus on the muscle itself, although you can a little, but it's more about how you focus and pre-visualize the act of accomplishing the range of motion immediately before the lift and then during the lift. It's almost like your mind leads your body in your imagination of doing the movement just slightly before you do it. And that's how you lift really heavy weights safely. All right, good. So remember, step 1, hit the gym. Step 2, don't stand in the gym and stare at people and check your phone. You're in the gym to work out. Step 4, progressive overload. Do those things over time, you'll get stronger. Make sure you have the proper recovery, good enough nutrition. And then to hit your personal bests, make sure it's at the end of a streak.